Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
For the record, could you please state your name and the position you hold in your organization?
All right. I'm Myla V Pilao from Trend Micro, Director for Technology Marketing.
Okay. The evidence you'll be giving today before the committee will be on oath. If you so desire, you can take an affirmation. Clerk Parliament, please carry out the affirmation.
Please take hold of the Bible in your left hand, raise your right hand, and recite the oath.
I, Myla V Pilao, swear that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome to the public hearing of the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus for today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you. You have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. And I'll now call upon Mr. Edwin Tong to lead the questioning.
Good afternoon, Ms. Myla.
Good afternoon, sir.
Ms. Pilao, I'm so sorry. You are Director of Core Technology at Trend Micro.
That's correct.
Could you just briefly describe what you do in that capacity?
Okay. I'm actually based in our R&D center in Manila, Philippines,
Yes.
where the largest congregation of our malware experts are. So my job is into 3 points. One is on the day-to-day management of critical incidents that brings forth security issues. And then second is to be able to translate a lot of these security issues into solutions that impacts our customers. And then third is I also do evangelization in terms of bringing forth countermeasures on how government organizations and businesses can adopt in its very difficult digital space.
Yes, thank you. Difficult and evolving difficult digital
That's correct.
space. Thank you. Now, I'd like to have a look at your report, which you've sent in. And what I'll do is I'll take you through some paragraphs of your report and ask you for some elaboration or explanation at the appropriate junctures.
Okay, sir.
All right? Now, if you start with, you have several chapters. I'll start with the introduction. At page 1 into page 2, look at the impact that false information online has. And if I can just summarize the position, let me know whether that's correct. Generally, when you do a survey, quite a number of, that's the second table, quite a number of respondents, 58%, of the respondents to a US survey believe that even mainstream media spread online falsehoods. That's a fair reflection of the table?
Yes, sir.
Yes, and that 20% of these respondents do not feel confident themselves in discerning what's fake or what's not fake, right? And then if you look at the third page, 88% say that even if they can tell fakes from real, there remains a great deal of confusion or some confusion. Would you care to comment on that briefly?
Yes, sir. So this survey is obviously a U.S. Sort of a survey that we indicated in here. I think the confusion is bringing forth because number one is that there is data right now is very elastic. So when you talk about a particular topic, there are varying opinions. So I think that's one is the challenge of being presented with so many opinions on one particular topic. The second one is that there's also a study that 60% of what it is in the internet right now was not actually created by someone. It is a combinations of opinions that are merged into one. So I think that presents a lot of difficulty. And the third, I would say, is that we have a growing omni-platform where you can share, you can distribute, you can host, right? So that presents a challenge also because we have a lot of ways to get our information.
Yes.
So those three, I think, presents a lot of confusions, not just for readers, but audience itself.
Would you, if you look at page 3, would you accept that the surveys and the results of those surveys show us the dangers that fake news can bring to the real world?
That's correct, sir. So I think that presents a large difficulty in really discerning what is a true or otherwise information.
That's right. And at the top of page 4, you set out some examples of fake news and then the truth. And some of them have been fairly high profile and well reported. Just perhaps by way of example, on the left-hand side of this table, you set out an incident concerning a Canadian imam who is reported to have closed its mosque doors to Christian victims of Storm Harvey. Could you just give us a little bit of elaboration on that example, the impact it's had, and how it had to be corrected?
Okay, so this is just one of the many probably challenges. I think in this particular case, pardon me, but I'm not so in-depth with it, but essentially this is
Right.
really going through a social media platform that's saying that in this particular incident is that there is a disbarment of certain religions. People who are in certain religions are not allowed inside that forum, right? So this was distributed in social media platform. And again, because the topic is very, I would say, heightened, because they're talking about race, talking about religion, there is an immediate attraction already from people who have the same ideology. So that's particularly that happened until the imam actually made the correction that it is not a true information.
So topics such as race, religion, where there are serious social divisive fault lines, potentially, would that, in your opinion, carry a greater weight and therefore higher degree of transmission? Should there be false news on this?
In our study in Trend Micro, we distinguished the cyber propaganda as part of fake news essentially into two folds. One is anything that is politically decisive, and then the other one is financial.
Yes.
In terms of race, religion, we indicated that as part of the political ideology sector. So I would say yes, those
Okay.
two big
That's
aspects.
something that you cover later in your report. We'll get to that.
Oh, sorry.
Together with the triangle as well.
All right.
Now, so these examples, I think, illustrate that online falsehoods is a growing global problem. Would you accept?
Yes.
You also talk about, if you just go down the page at page 4, you also talk about cyber propaganda campaigns using DIY kits to automatically spam social media users, which then has a reach of hundreds of thousands of readers across platforms. Would you just briefly elaborate on that, please?
Okay, so when we say DIY, these are low-hanging, very not so complex kind of tools that can easily be programmed and manipulated, and then they get immediate results. So let's say DIY tools such as if I want to spam a volume of users on a particular demographic or particular region is a kind of a DIY. So it will cost you less if you want to buy it, but it also is very easy to do because it has low-level programming required.
Right. Speaking of easy to do, there was one example you outlined in the following page of your report, which was particularly interesting about this restaurant that had the ability to get itself to a #1 position by reason of using some information online. Some were false information. Some of them were just postings. Are you familiar with that example?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So this is the example of a shed restaurant in London. Can you just quickly take us through the facts?
Okay. For this particular example, sir, I know the technical background, but not the entire story. But normally this kind of technique is very popular at the moment because a lot of us would look into particularly reviews to
Yes.
influence our decision-making
Yes.
process. So a lot of the cyber criminals are very familiar with that. So how they're able to do it is either in two ways. One is what you call click farm, where you have, and this is employing either bots or most of the time in underprivileged area, they normally acquire workers to do the actual click farm.
Actual clicking.
Yeah, so this is the actual manner of clicking likes or dislikes, right? Or making repeatable same reviews or opinion on a certain element. So that's how it normally influence. And most of the time, the challenge, not the challenge, the technique here is to have immediate volume reviewers. And again, if you're just doing the same thing, it is very, very routinary. So that's how you did normally do that.
I understand. I'll just quickly share with you what I read from the story
Yes,
on the facts of this case. So there was this individual who wanted to set up a restaurant, and he wanted to test how his restaurant would do on TripAdvisor. So he's from London, set up a restaurant at the back of his home called The Shed. And he then decided to promote this online and use these devices, the click farms and clickbaits
Yes.
that you speak about. And very shortly, from the time he started the restaurant, which was May 2017, where he was ranked something like 18,000 something on TripAdvisor, got friends, people to write reviews, got people to share the reviews, like the reviews. And within something like 3 months, he was ranked 156 with postings like this. And also with postings of food, which were ultimately fake. So he had someone put up a picture like this, where it's held together by a foot, but looking quite attractive otherwise. And 3 months after that, by November 2017, following all these postings, he became the #1 London restaurant on TripAdvisor. So all of this achieved using click farms, likes, shares, and reviews. Would this example illustrate how easy it is really to have these mechanisms, whether it's bots or actual persons, come and influence an opinion?
Yes, sir. It becomes easier because of two ways. One is, as I said, there are this kind of techniques that are proven to be very successful. And then they are essentially, the second one is that, sadly, the challenge is we have very not enough controls and standards in place in some of the distribution platform that allowed to flood a lot of this information.
I see. It's also a reflection of the fact that the more times a certain type of news is shared or posted, it's more likely to gain traction.
That's correct. So the higher you get in the review or in the ranks or even in searches, the better it is for you. So that's the natural attraction of a lot of the users.
And therefore, the more unlikely it is to discern whether it's true or not true.
That's correct, sir.
And it's something that if you don't find a way to control or check, could then proliferate in a large way. I mean, as you say, for political or financial reasons. Yes. Now, I'd like you to now look at chapter 2 of your report, where you set out the triangle. Would you just briefly describe the triangle?
Okay. So in our analysis and research on the study of fake news, we believe that to be able to successfully do such campaign, and our word of campaign is running a fake news topic, we feel that these three areas are very prominent. Number one is what we call the motivation, and there's so many levels of motivation. At the end of the day, it's discrediting someone, influencing or swaying a particular opinion, or worse, is rallying people or organizations to take action, right? So that's the motivation part. The second one that we have seen is that the most prolific way to be able to distribute that is on social media platforms, which we believe are what we call, they're also being abused at the moment as a distribution platform. That is because a large number of users are actually in there. So if you're looking into a minimax approach, I would just go to a social media platform because that's where the people are. And the third level is that we believe that there's also both what we call underground tools and services, or what we call gray marketplaces that sell and trade a lot of these tools so that you can do a lot of this campaign in the most efficient way.
Right. So to succeed, a fake news campaign would generally want to rely on these three aspects that form the triangle.
That's correct, sir.
Just let's look a little bit more about the three aspects. So starting with motivations, you have at page 7 set out some of the three major factors on this. So obviously low cost, which I think you mentioned elsewhere in your report is important. It's also under the cloak of anonymity, which allows someone to be perhaps a little bit more bold in what he or she might post. And then to gain credibility through number of likes, reviews, clicks, and so on. Would that be right?
That's correct, sir.
And as you mentioned earlier, the two major motivations for such campaigns would typically be political or financial, or sometimes both. And you also say at the bottom of the page that political propaganda campaigns are generally designed to get people to change their political beliefs or opinions. These may aim to destabilize target countries or discredit personalities that oppose the perpetrator's intended outcomes. Could you briefly elaborate on this?
Okay, sir. So when we talk about political propaganda, and again, in our study at the moment, the more prominent one that we see really is on swaying public opinion, whether, again, depends on what your belief is, right? So they normally ride on what we call, they try to ride the wave. So either A, they look into major political events, like the more famous one are elections, essentially national elections. Or second is that they look into a more prominent political discussion or scenario that can intrigue a large majority. So that's the political propaganda that they do. At the end of the day, it really depends on what motivation they have, whether they wanted to create a certain new ideology or focus on an existing ideology. So That's what we're taking a look at. The other portion also is on, they're trying to take a look at discrediting an individual, whether they are influencer, whether they're political figure, or even journalists in some point of view. So these are the two growing more political propaganda that we have seen so far.
So you typically find political institutions or prominent political figures being the target of such campaigns.
Right.
And I suppose possible victims would include people of some standing in society or some profile.
Correct, sir.
Now, in terms of the tools and services that you describe, if you can just go with me, please, to page 9 of your report.
Yep.
You talk about content marketing services. And let me just read the last paragraph of page 9. It says, for as little as US $15 to $30, fake news operators can obtain 5,000 to 1,500 word articles from content marketing service providers. Would you just briefly elaborate on this?
Okay. In the tools and services, there are many aspects that we do have. Number one is on content creation. So there are underground tools and great tools where if you don't have time to create a particular content and a convincing one, then you go to this particular part.
Right.
It really also, the price in the underground community vary. I mean, it's not like where we are in the true economics right now. It varies also in terms of how high quality do you want it, how topical do you want it, and how convincing you have. So at the moment, the tools, as I said, can be legitimate advertising and content marketing tools or illegitimate or abuse sort of tools and services as well.
So the ones which are subject to the abuse would be the bots and the click farms.
They are mechanism in terms of creating more engagement on that particular content.
I see. Okay. You actually go on to describe some of these services, and I'll just quickly run through them. At page 10, you talk about public opinion monitoring systems that can survey, research on, and influence opinions in prominent forums and social media for a price. And then over the page, social media promotion, you can have services which bank on the popularity of social media accounts to trigger word-of-mouth effect, and they cost anywhere between US 16 cents and 180,000, depending on the number of followers. You can even get fake operators, I think you say at page 11, to take down content that you do not want to see published. So these are all different ways of shaping and influencing what a social media user might see or might not see, right?
Yes, sir.
And that would skew information and then lead one to a view that is not necessarily consistent with what is real-world information. If you just go to page 15, you have what I thought was a quite interesting table. So here you have the price list, like a menu of all the items that you can buy off the gray market or the underground. And so let me see if I understand this table correctly. What you're saying here is if you just focus on the left table, so for something like 4 cents US, you can buy a social media like. Or for 19 cents, you can buy 1,000 WeChat likes. And for $2 or so, you can buy 500 retweets. Is that how I would read this?
Yes, sir.
And these are fairly common
Yes, sir.
and accessible?
They are common on either the underground community or on online platforms that are openly discussing illegal activities such as this.
So one could buy, say, 1 million Instagram likes for $18.
Correct, sir.
And that would in turn then shape the way information is purveyed and conveyed on the social media platforms.
Yes, sir.
Because as we discussed earlier, the more the number of likes or reviews there are, the more one thinks that that's true. Right, thank you. If you just go back a little to page 12, where you talk about click farm services, vote manipulation, at page 13, crowdsourcing services and automation bots. Can you, and also at page 14, content distribution services, can you briefly describe these services and what they do to information online?
Okay. So again, there are certain tools that are catering to whatever you probably would want to happen in a particular content. So there are content creation in the likes of content marketing. There are those who are concentrating only on distribution, or the ones that are concentrating only on engagement. So it really depends on where you're looking at, or takedown. So the services that are described here are pretty much what we call on the distribution, and trying now to influence the kind of ideology or opinion that you wanted to make. So for instance, in the social media promotion, so what they normally do is scan the network, depends on your target market. They scan the network who's slightly more influencer in that market, and they try to inject and put that particular post in the platform of that individual or group, can be a group or organization, right? And hoping that they be able to click that. So they try to channel a lot of those information and flood it. So that's what they call the social media marketing promotion. In the crowdsourcing is another area where if you want to make a particular opinion, then you look into particular organizations that had the same interests. So instead of targeting a particular individual, it might be that particular interest. And again, it's a way of, again, flooding the platform with those particular views, either in advertorial that you often see on either the right-hand side, right? So, or in search engine, where you sometimes would, let's say, search a particular item and immediately they're there. So that's how they normally do in the crowdsourcing level. So when you click that particular opinion, let's say, maybe take a look at what the others are saying on this topic, click here, they normally would redirect you probably to an official or even a malicious domain where it captures your attention. So that's normally how some of the services are working. In our experience, again, it really depends on whether you want the manual one or automated one, because a large number of technologies right now have the capability rather to determine whether they're bots or human. So that's the reason that there's more intense way right now of doing it more manually than the bots, because at the moment they can be detected heavily.
So if one wants to have a objective, uninfluenced, unbiased view of what information is out there, one has to really remove the bots, remove the click farm clicks, and all these other influences which skew the true information.
Yes and no, sir. Yes, in the sense that if you have, sadly, it is not seen in the human eye whether this is actually an information that was done by an automated bot, right?
I see.
So it cannot be seen by the human eye, but also, so that's a no part. The yes part is that that's where there's a lot of the burden really on understanding whether this is a true information or otherwise relies on educated users, right? So using credible organizations, using credible sources, and doing, sadly, your own fact-checking at most of the time.
So on your no answer, what you're saying is that someone is not able to discern really between a like that is generated by a bot and a like that is generated by a genuine user.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, which makes it even worse to discern true from fact.
Yes.
I mean, true from falsity from fact.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Now, I'd like to ask you to look at the third aspect of that triangle, which is on social networks. You'll find it at page 17 of your report. And you start with Facebook as being the one social media with the highest number of active users. And at page 18, you set out the relative usage or presence on each of these platforms. So Facebook being the highest, followed by YouTube and WhatsApp, and so on. How would this or these networks play its part in that third part of the triangle?
They are the most favored, most popular platforms at the moment. That's and except for the ones that we've seen exclusively, let's say in China, where they have their own equivalent of Facebook. So they play a huge part because the mainstream of distribution is actually going through their network. In such a way also that the appetite of a lot of the users between checking, let's say, a particular news. Let me give you an example. So today, if I take a look at the the information of what the weather is, the appetite of a lot of the users is actually look at Facebook than probably the weather, AccuWeather station, right? So that drives a lot of the behavior to just use the social media because it's the most favored one on behavior and on choice of content platform. So that's why they, in this particular example, the level of engagement extremely very high on those platforms.
So rather than going to the original source site, you use one of these social media platforms, most popularly the Facebook,
Yes,
to
sir.
get onto this.
That's the behavior that we see most
Right.
often.
So at page 18, you then have a paragraph that says it was not surprising then that in the months leading up to the 2016 US presidential elections, viral fake election news stories outperform real news on Facebook. And then over the page, you have a interesting diagram that is titled Top Facebook Engagements for Top 20 Election Stories. Can you just briefly elaborate on that?
Okay. The manner in terms of distribution, again, when you look at the content, content motivation of fake news, it's really riding the wave, right? So in that particular incident, the US election is not just a US issue only, but it's a global issue. So they try to ride the wave. And when we talk about they are distributing it right now on Facebook, there are two mechanisms that they do. Number one is just if you can just capture that particular topic, let's see who's winning the election, but actually when you look at it very closely, whether the context, the text, and even the picture, sometimes it's a very different meaning. So that's when they're just trying to get your attention and attract you into it because that's the most favored topic, right? But inside that is a very different
There's
one.
something else.
Right? Yes. So that's how they normally use it in this particular. The second one is that, again, there's a massive distribution because an average individual, again, has that strong appetite to share without even reading the next part of the content. So that there's a ultimate multiplier effect as opposed to a major news stream sort of a platform.
And this diagram shows us that the closer one gets to election day, the
Yes.
more it is that fake news would outperform mainstream news or true
Yes, sir.
news.
Yeah.
And now, over the page at page 20, you have another diagram, this time illustrating Twitter accounts and between gurus and sect followers. Can you again briefly explain this to us?
Okay, so this is a recent study that we did in terms of, again, looking into how political propaganda are used to influence or sway public opinion. And this is all in using another media platform called Twitter. So in Twitter, usually what we have seen is the behavior that we've seen that likely are they're distributing fake news is number one, they're using what we call gurus. Gurus in the sense that they have, this individual accounts have very large volume followers and almost like what we call a sect. So second is that you can see that their behavior is that they have down the line more followers also who are active. So normally the gurus are determined because they have very active posts, very active engagement, and very active distribution. And then it follows that they have very large volume of followers also in their network. What appears to be suspicious also is that when they start, they almost have identical tweets or identical posts. So which means it becomes really oblivious because how can you make 10 posts that fast, right? The second one is also the behavior in terms of the time, the varying time that they do because they almost post 24 hours a day. Hardly no sleep. So the third element also is that they have almost the same topic and they don't have other posts, meaning to say that 9 out of 10 of the things that they post is that particular topic. So you can see whether, if you look at it in the network profile, you can see that they're also very much associated with one another. So you can zoom into maybe 1 or 2 accounts. The other one is that when you look very deeply into this Twitter accounts is that they normally have very different profile, but the registration date, the activities are almost the same. So you can conclude with that assumption that they actually belong to the same kind of network, but spread sporadically.
And that would be instruments of on which one would use to influence opinions and,
Yes.
and increase the number of likes or reviews.
Yeah, in
And
this
shares.
case, the retweets. So
The
they
retweets.
become, they tweet the same information and they don't do any, they don't create other content on that.
Yes, and the objective of that would be to shape the news that someone else who seeks news on these platforms might read.
Correct, because in Twitter, then you would appear, they would have the higher probability to appear more upfront than the rest of the other information.
Over the page, you have another diagram. Could you explain this as well?
Yes. So this is also the same when we try to zoom into a particular one account. So the previous page, we're able to zoom into 2 particular account holders. But if you zoom further, you can see that this particular account, I don't know how to pronounce it, Algi Horanik, you can see that we're just trying to demonstrate in here the number of followers that they have and the number of tweets that they have with, which means they're able to share that one single post at so many given time and so many given hours of the day.
I see. Right, thank you. Now, at chapter 3, if I can ask you to go a few pages down at page 23, you have a picture or table that sets out how public opinion cycle works. Could you just briefly explain that?
Okay, so we'll have to credit this public opinion cycle from Lockheed Martin, but we're also using the same philosophy in terms of how cyber propagandists or likely the cyber criminals are doing this. At the end of the day, the reconnaissance identify a particular target. What is the particular opinion or audience that you want to influence or dissuade or create discord, right? So when you take a look at that particular target, you do a lot of research, a lot of analysis, especially if this individual are, holds a particular position in certain government that most of their informations are very classified or confidential. So that's the reconnaissance. The second one is that what kind of story, what is the key story that you want to make, which means, again, the kind of motivation that you want. If you want to discredit him, then you have to create that story. And this is where you normally have to build the story either from scratch or falsehood, right? Or present alternative information. In our opinion, this is the most critical one because when you prepare the story, you're almost hitting the ground in terms of developing the opinion that you want them to perceive, right? The delivery, again, talks about how will I deliver this information. It's not one time. It is a series of campaigns that I have to do to influence it. And here, we will go back to the tools and services that a lot of these propagandists can use because you don't have time in your hands. So you want it fast, you want it quick. So you normally use the tool so that you can spread it very fast and very easy. So that's the delivery. The exploitation at the moment will now look into how persistent you are in doing that. So in some sense, exploitation here works hand in hand with social media networks, right? So sometimes exploitation can be running polls. It can be putting up certain fake studies. So you're not trying to create in their minds that this is the truth, right? And the other one is persistence. Persistence, again, can work into both using legitimate and illegitimate tools. For instance, if I want to make that opinion really very persistent, I will go to a major news site, a major platform, and I will just buy an advertorial so that I can present it in a more credible kind of opinion and do the rest as well. And the last 2 parts really is what we call, after cleaning all of these things, it depends also on what kind of action do you want to take, right? And the last one is you have to remove the traces. You have to keep it low again as an individual because at the end of the day, you don't want to be traced, right? So removal can be into 2 things. One is just as simple as removing all of these items or essentially keeping it really low. So when the topic dies down, you want it to kind of go down as well. So your digital footprint is not there. But normally in some of the cyber criminals, they use multiple accounts and multiple identities.
Which makes it harder to trace.
Yes, it's harder to trace, right? So if this particular individual is the propagandist, suddenly he will go quiet. Sometimes that's the way of what we call cleaning up their acts together. And then they off to another campaign or off to another topic.
One such example of a campaign is that over the page at page 24, where you talk about how the public opinion cycle might work in the context of this story about a picture showed online about burning teepees and a caption that criticized the police severely. Would that be an example of how one might use that public opinion cycle and use it to some significant effect?
Yes, sir.
It's $200,000 on your estimate to cause a street protest in the U.S. over what is potentially an inflammatory issue. That's fairly low threshold, low bar for this to happen.
It depends on really, I would say, the logistics of it or where you want to put it. I guess in this particular example, it's a US one, so it is just really an average sort of cost to be able to deploy that actionable steps.
Right. Thank you. Kevin, thank you very much. Ms. Pilao, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Myla, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I would like to move to the section on your submission on countermeasures,
Yes, sir.
and specifically actually to the last page, where you speak of the decision to implement fake new laws or not requires careful consideration of all aspects of the problem. In my opinion, the problem looks like a very significant one, particularly when you look at that cycle that you spoke of, which originates from Lockheed Martin in your submission. It would appear that most countries, and I think this is also in your chapter, are leaning towards some form of regulation / legislation to deal with the problem. Would that be a correct characterization of the final chapter?
Yes, sir.
And that being the case, what in your view are the important considerations when one has to balance between the problem, which I think has been very clearly enunciated in your submission, and concerns that particularly civil society may have on freedom of speech and things of that nature?
I am also not a lawyer, but I think I have to admit that it's very difficult because, again, it's curtailing between what you can say and you cannot say. As a technologist, I would really focus on how organizations can probably help in, number one, in the detection. In our certain submissions, we have somehow developed some behaviors that if we can clearly analyze them, monitor them, and harvest a lot of these examples and information, the hope is that we can put them into a technological solution, right? So that they can help detect what likely is going to be a potential fake news. My point is that using a lot of this behavior in use cases is we can translate that into solutions. And this is where we need a lot of the organizations in the ICT sector, the technology, the ISPs and all that stuff, so that they can help in the potential detection of a particular fake news. And as I said earlier, majority of the fake news that we see is really riding the wave, right? Whatever would likely be a very potentially big news. So for me, that's number one, trying to understand whether detection can be implemented as a technology solutions in some of the platforms that we do have. The second one is that is really on heightening the level of education and translating it to something actionable. I think this is an excellent forum of heightening the awareness, but if we can empower the readers, the users, and the distributors alike with enough means so that they can take action on their end, either A, report it, or B, block it, or C, do something else, right? So if we can translate that information into something that they can be empowered to do, the better it gets, right? And for me, obviously, this is the legislation platform that is one of the best excellent solutions that we do have. But at the moment, what we're seeing is that, like how we began the write-up earlier, is that people are already confused of whether am I reading the right one or not, right? But at the moment, they're helpless in terms of, yeah, what do I do? What do I believe?
I think we had a helpful presentation, a helpful contributor like you yesterday who spoke of the fact that some of these issues may not be specific to a particular election, but it could have a longer runway in that you are looking to alter perceptions, not over a short period of time, but over a longer period of time. And those are the ones which could operate like a sleeper. For example, you may set up a site which just puts out news on, for example, accidents in another country, and run a line that that country is basically not safe. But of course, that's specific only to accidents occurring every now and then. But the way it's presented, the conclusion is this country is not safe. And you have those sort of things as well that occur. And in view of the earlier chart that Mr. Edwin Tong spoke about it, with regard to how cheap it is to purchase some of these perception-altering modalities or methods, likes and so forth. How do you regulate that? Do you have something in mind, or are you also suggesting that education is the way to go?
I think I believe that a lot of the technology platforms right now are doing at least the first or second base. So for instance, there are now built-in platforms, there are now built-in measures in some of the platforms that allow them to be able to understand who are the most active, let's say, Twitter accounts that comes to, let me rephrase. There are both technological identifiers that will help create actionable items to platforms to either take down certain accounts, to monitor, or put up a warning. So that's already built in. Remember when I talked about the sect or the gurus earlier, there are ways to identify them now. So then they can take action, right? So I think that's number one. Second is, it is my hope also that there must be somehow a centralized way of reporting or even consultation, right? Because at the moment, as I said, I'm not, like in the previous speaker, when you talk about healthcare and seniors are the more common target, they don't have a way to validate. They don't have a way to even ask, right? So the second low-hanging fruit probably is to have a centralized body where there must be a validation. And we already have, like in Singapore, I know that we have already CERT that are very strong and built in. So maybe they can put that into their mandate to just have a centralized way to report, to consult, especially on major public opinions items, right? And third is, there is a growing but not as fast in terms of the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we could use a lot of this technology because the foundation of a lot of that is the behavior, the data, and how it will translate to particular action. So if we can create, for instance, if we know that the image that was posted on a social media platform doesn't have anything to do with the topic, then the AI and ML can be able to detect that, right? So that should be able to create alarm and say, okay, do you really want to proceed or otherwise? So somehow those sensors can be built in by using, again, technologies that are already available.
Thank you.
Ms. Chia?
Thank you, Mr. Lau. Thank you for being with us. Just would like to look at your paragraphs on how technology can help. The first paragraph, you mentioned that outright blocking of site domains known for publishing fake news may be prone to a lot of false positives. Could you please elaborate on that?
Okay.
Thank you.
So there are, when I was talking about some identifiers on the technology level, like IP addresses or where they're coming from, or even just the URL, we have, if proven that these platforms or these sites are spewing falsehood information, they can be blocked, meaning to say that it prevents anyone from visiting them. And it's almost like trying to stop the bleeding at some point. So that's the blocking mechanism. The most ideal blocking mechanism is happening on the ISP level, right? So for instance, in our industry, we have the capability to block it, but when we say block it, it is only blocking the people who are using our product. So that's a very small percentage. The more effective one is using ISPs, especially there are major ISPs providers, so that they can block it also on their site. So there's more users who are more protected because they have bigger bases.
Okay, thank you. And also, in relation to your point about the use of AI to help flag out fake news and bot-generated news, again, I think we could agree that AI alone could not flag out all fake news. So It's something that could possibly be used, but again, as a complementary tool rather than a preeminent. Would you say so?
Yes, ma'am. So I think they can be used on the level of sensor, providing sensor, but you're correct. The next one is who will validate that sensor and take action.
Yes. And so if we were, I'm not sure about the level of technology at this moment, but how do you think we could persuade content distributors to act responsibly in embedding or blocking fake information?
I would go back to the initial recommendation earlier of carefully studying the online behavior techniques and tactics that are widely being used, and to counter that with the ability for them to detect it, so that there will be a way for them to be able to understand whether they are potentially going to spew or distribute fake news. The second one is probably put levels of severity, warning, not just on the distributor, but also on the user perspective, right? So that they can be intelligently be guided whether to proceed or otherwise, right? However, I have to really admit that, again, we will go back to that debatable statement of whether who are we to say whether which one is true or otherwise, right? So on the technology level, I'm just really bearing forth the fact that there are driven behavior and techniques that are already widely used. So if we can just use that as sensor, then that will probably help in the detection capability of delivering fake news or otherwise.
Yeah, but if I begin with a confirmation bias, if I am already only interested in reading what I want to read, then how likely do you think I would take heed to a warning that, this website is known for generating fake news?
It will go back to the challenge and the burden to the readers themselves. So I think it is really on how we could allow them to understand the real world impact of reading such information. But as I said, end of the day, it will be that user who would push the button or otherwise. So our role in the organization, for me, the role really is providing more ways to detect it so that they can control it. But at the end of the day, the responsibility rests with the user whether to proceed or otherwise. And I'm so sorry that I may not have a very strong response on how to, do that.
Thank you.
Yes, Edwin, go ahead.
I just have one more follow-up question to what you said. So what you're really saying is because of the fact that because of the digital revolution, the form in which fake news would be conveyed, transmitted, will take different shapes. And as time passes and there's more improvements to technology, it'll be more sophisticated. So would it be fair to say that when you look at countermeasures or how to deal with it, it really has to be a suite of measures rather than just one single one?
Yes, sir.
And you have to also take into account that you have differentiated forms of false information. Some would be obviously false. I mean, you have some examples that you set out in your paper, which need to be dealt with. And they, in turn, then may have to take on a more serious light because they have racial or religious undertones. And that has to be something that one looks at more carefully. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
And then perhaps on the other end of the spectrum and scale, you may have information that is questionable or debatable, for which you then suggested that you have a centralized reporting system or that you have a blocking mechanism, or you might then have a way in which you study the behavior of how these information is being transmitted, and then you block it at the source. So different types of responses for different types of information and different threats. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And if I may just add, sir, I
Yes.
think this requires really the concerted effort of a lot of technology players to come together, because the brain power of one is not enough. Because as you said, there's so many doors where they can come in. But if we put it, really elevate it as a conversation amongst technology player and solution player, I think the better the field it will be.
Thank you.
Ms. Sun?
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that based on what you said earlier, that about studying the online behavior techniques and tactics, that basically what you're saying is the understood technological ways for us to already assess the pathways in which such information could be spread. That is one aspect of the spectrum. The other side is I also understand that in the Philippines right now, that there is a bill, I think that has been filed last month, that seeks to prohibit government officials and employees from sharing and spreading false information.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
that the Philippines presidential spokesman has said that the proposed measure would violate the officials' right to free speech. So would you agree that at the end of the day, to decide on what measures to take, there's actually a values-based judgment to it?
Value-based judgment.
Values-based judgment. Then
Oh,
you have
yeah,
to make
yeah.
a...
Yeah, I think, again, it's an evident of the fact that it requires heightened critical thinking and clear discretion to be able to discern information versus otherwise. Did I answer your question, Madam?
Okay, so basically what you have shared with us, and I think it was very comprehensive, you have shown us the techniques, the various methods that could be used in which information could be disseminated, fake news or otherwise. And at the same time, while all this is happening, that at the end of the day, if we want to decide on what to do about it, that could potentially have to have a values-based judgment and way for us to assess it.
Yeah, it really
Okay.
depends on what principles do you uphold and what values do you uphold, and most likely we'll go with that judgment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, as there are no more questions, Ms. Pilao, thank you very much for your presentation and your contribution. We'll be sending you a transcript of today's proceedings. Please go through them. If there are any corrections, any mistakes, please correct them and send it back to us. And once again, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Pilao.